His tiny hands were trembling as he asked for bread, but when our eyes met, my world stopped. Those familiar eyes, they were exactly like my brother's. James never expected that a routine visit to the downtown district would change everything. A successful businessman with billions in his accounts, he'd built his empire from nothing after being separated from his family during childhood. But fate works in mysterious ways. When a small boy approached him begging for food, something in those innocent eyes triggered a memory buried deep within his heart. Could this homeless child somehow be connected to the family he'd lost 20 years ago? The morning had started like any other for James. He'd woken up in his penthouse overlooking the city, enjoyed his gourmet breakfast prepared by his personal chef, and dressed in his custom-tailored suit. His schedule was packed with meetings, but he decided to walk a few blocks to clear his mind before his driver picked him up. The fresh air felt good against his face as he strolled down the busy street, nodding occasionally to people who recognized him from business magazines. He wasn't one to flaunt his wealth, preferring to keep a low profile despite his success. But even in his understated attire, there was no hiding the aura of confidence that surrounded him. Life had been kind to James in recent years. At 35, he'd accomplished more than most people do in a lifetime. His tech company had revolutionized the industry, and his investments turned to gold almost magically. He had everything money could buy: luxury homes around the world, private jets, cars, and a reputation as one of the most eligible bachelors in the country. Yet despite all his success, there was always something missing, a void he couldn't fill no matter how much wealth he accumulated. Sometimes at night, memories from his childhood would surface, fragmented images of a family he barely remembered. James had been separated from his family during a chaotic evacuation when he was just 8 years old. A massive fire had torn through their neighborhood, and in the panic, he'd been pulled onto a different bus than his parents and younger brother. He ended up in a shelter across the country, with no identification and too traumatized to communicate clearly. By the time he recovered enough to tell his story, the system had already processed him as an orphan. His memories of home were too vague. He couldn't even remember his family's last name. He bounced between foster homes until he was 18, carrying only the faint image of his little brother's unique eyes. Those eyes had been distinctive, an unusual shade of amber with a starburst pattern of gold radiating from the pupils. His mother had called them sunrise eyes and said they were a blessing passed down through generations in their family. James had always wondered if his brother still had those eyes, if he had grown tall like their father, if he even remembered having an older brother at all. These thoughts had driven him through countless sleepless nights as he built his empire, hoping that someday his success might help him reconnect with his lost family. As he walked down that fateful street, James noticed a small commotion outside a bakery. A child, no more than 7 or 8, was being shooed away by the shop owner. The boy's clothes were ragged, his face smudged with dirt, but he stood with a dignity that seemed beyond his years. "Please, sir, just a piece of bread," the child was saying, his voice steady despite the rejection. James felt a pang in his heart. Something about the scene pulled him closer, as if invisible strings were tugging him toward this random moment on a random day. James found himself walking toward the bakery before he even realized what he was doing. The shop owner was growing increasingly frustrated, raising his voice at the child. "I've told you 3 times now, no money, no bread. Go beg somewhere else." The little boy didn't cry or throw a tantrum. He simply stood there, hands clasped in front of him, looking at the ground. As James approached, he reached into his pocket for his wallet. "I'll pay for whatever he wants," he said to the baker, whose demeanor instantly changed upon recognizing a potential wealthy customer. "Oh, certainly, sir. Right away." The baker's tone shifted so dramatically that James had to suppress a grimace. The little boy looked up in surprise, and that's when it happened. The moment that sent a jolt of electricity through James's entire body. Those eyes staring back at him were sunrises, amber with golden starbursts, identical to the eyes that had haunted his dreams for 20 years. James froze, unable to speak or move, as the world seemed to spin around him. It couldn't be possible. The coincidence would be too extraordinary. but those eyes were unmistakable. "Thank you, mister," the boy said softly, his voice pulling James back to reality. "I'm sorry to be trouble. I just haven't eaten since yesterday." His accent was slight but familiar, reminiscent of the region where James had been born. James knelt down slowly, bringing himself to eye level with the child. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking, not just the eyes, but something in the shape of his face, the line of his jaw. Could it be? Could this child somehow be related to his long-lost family? "What's your name, young man?" James asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. The child hesitated, as if weighing whether it was safe to share this information with a stranger, even one buying him bread. "Michael," he finally answered. "Michael Taylor." The surname meant nothing to James. He'd been too young to remember his own last name when he was separated from his family. But the first name sent another shock through his system. His little brother had been named Michael. "Nice to meet you, Michael. I'm James." He extended his hand, which the boy shook with surprising formality. "Would you like more than just bread? Maybe a proper meal?" Michael's eyes widened, the golden flecks seeming to dance in the amber. "Yes, please," he whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might cause the offer to disappear. James stood up and turned to the baker, who was hovering nearby. "We'll take 2 of everything fresh, packed to go," he said, handing over his credit card. "And then this young man and I are going to have lunch." The bakery bag was filled with fresh rolls, pastries, and a chocolate cake that Michael kept eyeing with barely concealed longing. James led him to a quiet cafe across the street, canceling his upcoming meetings with a quick text to his assistant. Something far more important had just entered his life, and business could wait. The hostess raised an eyebrow at Michael's appearance, but quickly showed them to a private table in the back when she recognized James. For his part, Michael seemed overwhelmed by the restaurant, sitting stiffly in his chair and staring at the menu as if it were written in a foreign language. "You can order anything you want," James said gently, noticing the boy's discomfort. "The burgers here are excellent." Michael looked up, those haunting eyes filled with uncertainty. "Can I really have anything?" When James nodded, a small smile appeared on his face, a smile that triggered another memory, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. As they waited for their food, James carefully began asking questions, trying not to frighten the child or reveal too much of his own suspicions. "Do you live nearby, Michael?" The boy's smile faded, replaced by a wariness that no child should have to carry. "Sort of," Michael answered vaguely, looking down at his hands. "Me and my dad move around a lot." James nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the surge of hope at the mention of a father. "Is your dad at work right now?" Michael shook his head, the wariness deepening. "He's sick. That's why I was trying to get bread. We haven't had much food lately because he can't work." The words were simple, but delivered with such adult resignation that James felt his throat tighten. Whatever circumstances had brought this child to beg for bread, they were clearly dire. Their food arrived, a burger for Michael that seemed enormous in his small hands, and a sandwich for James that he barely noticed. He watched as the boy tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but hunger eventually won out, and he devoured the meal with the desperation of someone who didn't know when he might eat again. James ordered dessert, unable to resist the joy that lit up Michael's face when the chocolate sundae arrived. Between bites, the story began to unfold. Michael and his father had been evicted from their apartment 3 weeks ago and were now staying in a shelter when they could get in, or in their old car when they couldn't. "Dad was a music teacher before he got sick," Michael explained, scraping the last of the ice cream from his bowl. "He still tries to teach me when he feels okay. He says music is in our blood." Another puzzle piece. James's father had been a music teacher too, playing multiple instruments and filling their home with melody. James felt his hands trembling slightly as he asked his next question, trying to sound casual. "That sounds nice. Does your dad play an instrument?" Michael nodded enthusiastically. "The violin. He's amazing. He has this really old violin with a special marking inside that his grandfather gave him. Says it's our family treasure." The violin with a marking. James nearly gasped aloud. His father's violin had had a small birthmark-shaped stain in the wooden side, what his father had always called the family seal. This couldn't be coincidence anymore. There were too many connections. James needed to meet Michael's father immediately, but he had to proceed carefully. The last thing he wanted was to frighten the boy or make promises he couldn't keep. "Michael," he said gently, "I'd like to help you and your father, if you'll let me. Could you take me to where he is?" Uncertainty flashed across the child's face, the caution of a boy who had learned not to trust too easily. "Why would you help us? You don't even know us." The question was fair, and James admired the boy's wisdom beyond his years. How could he explain the impossible hope rising in his chest without sounding crazy? "Sometimes people just want to help," he said simply, "and I have more than enough to share." Michael studied him with those sunrise eyes, weighing his sincerity. Finally, he nodded. "Dad always says to trust your gut, and my gut says you're okay." James felt a rush of relief. "Thank you, Michael. That means a lot to me. Should we bring him some food from the bakery?" Michael's face lit up. He'd love that, especially the chocolate cake. He always says life's too short to skip dessert. Another memory surfaced, James's father saying those exact words as he snuck them cookies before dinner. With each new connection, James's heart raced faster, but he forced himself to stay calm. There was still the possibility that this was all an extraordinary coincidence, and he didn't want to devastate himself if it turned out these weren't the family members he'd lost so long ago. They gathered their bakery bags and left the restaurant, Michael leading the way with newfound energy. They walked several blocks, turning into increasingly run-down neighborhoods. James noticed how Michael navigated the streets with the confidence of someone much older, aware of which areas to avoid and which shortcuts to take. Eventually, they reached a small park where several homeless people had set up temporary camps. Michael headed toward an old sedan parked at the far end, its once blue paint now faded and peeling. "That's our car," he explained. "Dad's probably sleeping. He gets really tired since he got sick." James followed, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel, his heart in his throat. As they approached the car, James could see a figure reclined in the driver's seat. Michael ran ahead, knocking gently on the window. Dad, wake up. I brought food and a nice man who wants to help us." The figure stirred, slowly sitting up and opening the car door. The man who emerged was thin and pale, with several days' growth of beard, but there was no mistaking the eyes, the same sunrise eyes that had been passed down to his son. He looked at James with confusion, then alarm, putting a protective arm around Michael. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse but with an edge of steel. James couldn't speak. He was staring at a face he'd never thought he'd see again. Older, weathered by hardship, but unmistakably his brother. The same brother he'd been separated from 20 years ago during the chaos of the evacuation. Michael's father was staring back, confusion giving way to something else, a dawning recognition that seemed impossible. "James," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Little Mikey," James replied, using the nickname only family had known. The man's legs seemed to give out, and he sat heavily on the edge of the car seat, his hands trembling as he reached out. "They told us you were dead," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "After the fire, when they couldn't find you, they eventually declared you dead. Mom and Dad never believed it, though. They searched for years." James felt his own eyes filling with tears as he took his brother's outstretched hand. "I ended up across the country. By the time I could tell anyone who I was, the system had already processed me as an orphan. I couldn't remember our last name, just faces and first names. I've been looking too, all these years." Michael was looking between them in confusion, tugging at his father's sleeve. "Dad, do you know him?" The older Michael, James's brother, pulled his son close, his voice choked with emotion. "This is your Uncle James, Mikey. My brother who was lost to us before you were born. The one Grandpa and Grandma never stopped looking for." The boy's eyes widened, those sunrise eyes that had started this whole chain of events. "The one from the stories? The one who used to carry you on his shoulders?" James let out a sob at that. He had indeed carried his little brother everywhere, proud to be the big brother with such responsibility. James knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "I didn't know I had a nephew, but I'm so happy to meet you." Little Michael surprised him by throwing his arms around James's neck in a fierce hug. Dad says I'm named after him, and he's named after Grandpa. Does that mean you have a James too? The innocent question brought laughter through tears. No, but maybe someday, James replied, rising to face his brother again. Michael, what happened? Why are you living like this? Where are Mom and Dad? The story came out slowly as they sat in the park, sharing the bakery goods. Their parents had never recovered from losing James, though they'd never stopped searching. They died in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving everything to Michael. He'd been doing well as a music teacher, married with a son, until his wife left them and he was diagnosed with lymphoma. The medical bills had drained his savings, and without health insurance, he'd lost everything: his home, his job, and nearly his hope. But throughout it all, he'd held onto the family violin and his son, determined that they would survive together, just as his parents had taught him. I'm going to take care of everything, James promised, his mind already racing with plans. Both of you are coming home with me today. We'll get you medical treatment, Michael. The best doctors, whatever you need. His brother shook his head, pride warring with desperation. James, I can't accept charity, even from you. We just met again after all these years. James placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the bones beneath the thin jacket. It's not charity. It's family. Would you have turned me away if our situations were reversed? The question hung in the air until Michael finally shook his head, a small smile breaking through. Little Mikey was already gathering their meager belongings from the car, excitement evident in every movement. Are we going to live in a real house again, Dad? The hope in his voice was heartbreaking. His father nodded, still seeming dazed by the turn of events. It seems so, son. Your uncle is. He trailed off, looking at James with sudden curiosity. What do you do, James? You're obviously doing well. James smiled, almost embarrassed by his success in the face of his brother's struggles. I own Horizon Technologies. I build computers and software. Michael's jaw dropped. Horizon? You're that James Roberts? The billionaire? Roberts was my foster family's name. James explained. I kept it because I had nothing else. But yes, that's me. Little Mikey's eyes widened to saucers. We're related to a billionaire? Dad, does this mean you can get your medicine now? The child's priorities touched James deeply. Not excitement about toys or games, but his father's health. Michael hugged his son close, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, buddy. I think things are going to get better now. James called his driver, who arrived within minutes, looking only slightly surprised to find his employer with 2 shabby companions. The drive to James's penthouse was filled with careful conversation, brothers getting to know each other again across the chasm of 20 years. They talked about their parents, about Michael's music career before his illness, about James's journey from foster care to business success. Little Mikey fell asleep against his father's shoulder, exhausted by the day's events and probably the first full meal he'd had in weeks. He's an amazing kid, James said, watching his nephew's peaceful face. You've done a wonderful job with him, especially given the circumstances. Michael stroked his son's hair, tears gathering in his eyes again. I tried. God, I tried so hard not to end up where we did. But when medical bills started piling up and I was too sick to work, it happened so fast, James. 1 month we had an apartment and food. The next we were sleeping in the car. James felt a surge of anger at a system that could let this happen to a family, to his family. It ends today, he promised. Tomorrow we'll get you to an oncologist. Little Mikey will have a tutor until we find the right school. And I'm calling my lawyer to start the process of changing my last name back to our family name. The penthouse left both Michaels speechless. Little Mikey ran from window to window, marveling at the view of the city sprawled below them. We're like birds up here, he exclaimed, pressing his hand against the glass. The elder Michael moved more cautiously, looking out of place and uncomfortable among the luxury. James showed them to the guest rooms, each bigger than any apartment Michael had rented in recent years. I'll have some clothes delivered, James said, noticing how his brother's shoulders slumped with what might have been shame at his current state. And I've already called Dr. Reeves. She's the best oncologist in the country. She'll see you first thing tomorrow. James, this is too much, Michael protested weakly, though he couldn't hide the hope in his eyes at the mention of medical treatment. "You don't owe us this." James shook his head firmly. "I've spent 20 years building wealth without anyone to share it with, Michael. Do you know what I used to dream about? Finding my family again and making sure they never wanted for anything. Now I've found you. Through a miracle I still can't quite believe, and you think I wouldn't move heaven and earth to help." His brother's resolve crumbled then, and he embraced James, both men clinging to each other as if afraid to let go again. Little Mikey emerged from exploring his new room, eyes wide with wonder. "Uncle James, there's a bathtub as big as our whole car in there." The adults laughed, tension breaking. "Why don't you take a nice hot bath while we talk?" James suggested. "There should be bubbles and everything in the cabinet." The boy needed no further encouragement, darting back into the bathroom. Once he was out of earshot, Michael's expression grew serious. "James, I need to know what the doctors will find. I might not have long, and I need to know Mikey will be taken care of." James put a hand on his brother's shoulder, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on him. A welcome weight, after so many years of carrying success alone. "Whatever happens with your health, that boy will never worry about a roof over his head or food on his table again. But I'm not giving up on you, Michael. Money can't buy everything, but it can buy the best medical care in the world, and that's what you're getting." Michael's sunrise eyes filled with tears. "I named him after me because I wanted to give him everything I had. Turns out that wasn't much in the end." "You gave him everything important," James insisted. "Look at him. He's kind, brave, resourceful. He was begging for bread to feed his sick father, not candy for himself. That's character, Michael, and no amount of money can buy that." A splash and a delighted squeal from the bathroom made them both smile. "When I saw his eyes outside that bakery, I thought I was hallucinating," James admitted. "Those sunrise eyes. Mom always said they were magic, that they would guide us home if we got lost. I guess she was right after all." The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Dr. Reeves arrived with her team, setting up a makeshift examination room in James's home office. James's personal shopper delivered wardrobes for both Michaels, and a tutor arrived to assess little Mikey's educational needs. James worked from home, making calls from the living room while keeping one eye on his newfound family. He watched as his brothers submitted to blood draws and scans, his face a mask of brave resignation. Little Mikey worked with the tutor, his intelligence evident in how quickly he grasped concepts despite his interrupted education. By afternoon, Dr. Reeves had a preliminary assessment. "The lymphoma is advanced but not untreatable," she told them, her tone professional but kind. "We'll need to start aggressive therapy immediately, but I've seen patients recover from worse." Michael nodded, clutching his son's hand. "Well, my chances?" The doctor hesitated, then opted for honesty. "About 60% chance of full remission with the treatment plan I'm recommending. It won't be easy, but you're relatively young and otherwise healthy despite recent hardships." James stepped forward. "Whatever it costs, whatever specialists you need to consult, make it happen." As Dr. Reeves departed with promises to arrange hospital admission the following day, James pulled his lawyer aside. "I want to establish a trust for my nephew immediately," he instructed. "And I want to add Michael as a family member on all my insurance policies. Also, start proceedings to legally change my name back to our family name." The lawyer nodded, making notes. "And sir, what about your will?" James hadn't considered that, but the answer was obvious. "Update it. Everything goes to my brother and nephew if anything happens to me." Michael overheard this last part and protested, but James was adamant. That evening, as little Mikey explored the penthouse's entertainment system with a wonder only a child could muster, the brothers sat on the balcony watching the sunset. "You know," Michael said softly, "when things were at their worst, I used to tell Mikey stories about his Uncle James. I made you into a kind of superhero, the lost brother who was surely having grand adventures somewhere in the world." He laughed softly. "Turns out I wasn't far off. You really did become something extraordinary." James shook his head, watching the golden light that matched their family's eyes. "Not as extraordinary as you," he countered. "You kept going through impossible circumstances. You raised an amazing son alone, while battling cancer and homelessness." He paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. I built an empire, but you built character in yourself and in him. That's worth more. Michael smiled, the first truly relaxed smile James had seen on his face. Maybe we're both extraordinary in different ways. Sunrise eyes, remember? Mom said they meant we were destined for unusual paths. Inside, little Mikey's laughter rang out as he discovered some new feature, the sound binding the brothers together with invisible threads of family and future. The hospital room was transformed by James's influence. A private suite with additional beds, so he and little Mikey could stay overnight when needed. Michael began his treatment with a courage that amazed the medical staff, enduring the side effects with quiet dignity. Little Mikey split his time between hospital visits and lessons with his tutor, who reported that despite gaps in his formal education, the boy had a natural aptitude for mathematics and music. Just like his grandfather, James remarked proudly, remembering their father's talent for both subjects. The family violin had been professionally restored and placed in a glass case in the penthouse living room, a symbol of their reconnection. As weeks passed, James restructured his work schedule around his brother's treatment and his nephew's needs. Board members raised eyebrows at first, but soon adjusted to seeing their CEO with a small boy in tow at headquarters or receiving video calls from hospital rooms. James found himself changed by his new responsibilities, more grounded, more present, more aware of what truly mattered. The wealth he'd accumulated took on new meaning as a tool to protect his rediscovered family rather than as a measure of his success. Uncle James, little Mikey asked one day as they rode home from the hospital, "Were you lonely before you found us?" The question caught James off guard with its perception. "Yes," he admitted after a moment's thought. "I was very lonely, even when I was surrounded by people." Little Mikey nodded sagely. "Dad and I were lonely too, even when we were together." He said, "Missing someone leave a hole in your heart that nothing else can fill." James was continually impressed by his nephew's emotional intelligence, clearly nurtured by a father who had taught him to express his feelings even in their darkest times. "Your dad is a very wise man," James replied, thinking of all the emptiness he'd tried to fill with achievements and acquisitions. By the third month of treatment, Dr. Reeves delivered cautiously optimistic news. The cancer was responding to therapy, shrinking more rapidly than expected. "Nothing's certain yet," she warned, "but these results are very encouraging." Michael allowed himself a small smile of hope, his once-gaunt face beginning to fill out as proper nutrition and reduced stress worked alongside the medical interventions. Little Mikey celebrated by composing a song on the keyboard James had bought him, playing it for his father with intense concentration, his small fingers finding melodies that echoed the family's musical heritage. James threw himself into researching lymphoma treatments worldwide, using his connections to consult with specialists across the globe. He arranged for experimental treatments to be made available if necessary, though Dr. Reeves believed the current protocol might be sufficient. "You can't solve everything with money and influence," Michael gently reminded him during one late-night conversation at the hospital. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, but after missing 20 years of being your brother, I need to do everything possible. I can't lose you again, not when I've just found you." Through it all, little Mikey became the unexpected emotional anchor for both men. His resilience and adaptability in the face of such dramatic life changes humbled them. One evening, as James helped him with math homework while Michael rested, the boy looked up with those sunrise eyes and said, "I think Grandma and Grandpa sent you to us, Uncle James. Dad always said they were watching over us, and they knew exactly when we needed help the most." The simple faith in his statement brought tears to James's eyes. Perhaps there was some truth to it. What else could explain the miraculous timing of their reunion? 6 months after their chance encounter outside the bakery, Michael received the news they'd all been hoping for. His cancer was in remission. The celebration at the penthouse was intimate but joyous, with Dr. Reeves joining them for dinner. "This doesn't mean we stop being vigilant," she cautioned, "but it does mean we've won this battle." Little Mikey, who had grown 2 inches and gained a healthy glow in the months of proper care, presented his father with a handmade card that read, "No more cancer. in colorful letters. Michael held it like a treasure, his eyes, those family eyes, bright with unshed tears. "What happens now?" Little Mikey asked as they enjoyed the chocolate cake James had ordered from that same bakery where it all began. It was a profound question that hung in the air. For half a year, their lives had revolved around hospital visits and treatment schedules. The future suddenly stretched before them, full of possibilities that had seemed impossible when Michael and his son were living in their car. James had been considering this question for weeks, waiting for the right moment to share his thoughts. "I have some ideas," he said carefully, "but ultimately, it's up to you and your dad." Later that night, after little Mikey had gone to bed, James poured 2 glasses of their father's favorite whiskey, a brand he'd tracked down after learning about it during one of their many conversations about family history. "I've been thinking," he said, handing a glass to Michael. "Horizon Technologies has been considering expanding into music education software. We could use someone with your background to head up that division." Michael took a sip, considering. "Are you offering me a job out of charity, little brother?" There was no bitterness in the question, just honest inquiry. James shook his head. "I'm offering an opportunity to someone uniquely qualified. You were a music teacher before you got sick with a secondary degree in education. You understand both the technical aspects of music and how to teach it to others. That's exactly what we need." He hesitated, then added, "Plus, selfishly, it would keep you and Mikey here. I've looked into schools nearby. There's an arts academy that would be perfect for him." Michael swirled the amber liquid in his glass, its color not unlike their eyes. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "Not everything," James admitted. "I can't replace the years we lost. I can't bring back Mom and Dad. But I could try to build a future where our family stays together." He took a deep breath. "I've also had the lawyer draw up adoption papers for little Mikey. Only if something happens to you, which it won't," he added quickly. "But I want him to know that no matter what, he'll never be alone." Michael set down his glass and embraced his brother, the last walls between them falling away. "James Roberts Taylor," he said, using the name James had legally reclaimed, "you were always the planner in the family. Some things never change." The offices of Horizon Technologies underwent a transformation over the following year. A music education division took shape under Michael's direction, combining cutting-edge technology with traditional teaching methods. Little Mikey, now enrolled in the prestigious Arts Academy, often visited after school, testing new software with a child's honesty and a musician's ear. "Too complicated," he would declare, or "That's awesome, Dad." His feedback proved invaluable, earning him the unofficial title of junior consultant among the development team. James watched with pride as both Michael and his son flourished, their natural talents finally finding the support they deserved. The family settled into a rhythm, moving from the penthouse to a spacious home where each could have their own space while remaining close. James discovered the joy of being an uncle, different from fatherhood, but rewarding in its own way. He coached little Mikey's baseball team, attended his piano recitals, and found himself collecting silly ties because they made his nephew laugh. Michael regained his health and confidence, becoming a respected figure in the music education community. His innovative approaches to teaching music through technology earned recognition from educators worldwide. On the anniversary of their reunion, James arranged a special surprise. He had spent months secretly tracking down his brother's wife, little Mikey's mother, who had left when Michael first became ill. "She should know you're both okay," he explained when Michael questioned the decision. "And Mikey deserves the chance to know his mother, if she's willing." The meeting was tentative, emotional, complicated by years of absence and unexplained departure. She had remarried, started a new family, moved on in ways that couldn't be undone. But seeing her son again, healthy, happy, talented, opened a door to a different kind of relationship than the one that had ended. "Are you mad I found her?" James asked his brother afterward, as they watched little Mikey showing his mother his latest composition. Michael shook his head. "How could I be?" Look at his face. The boy was animated, eager to share his music with this woman who had given him life but missed so much of it. "Besides," Michael added with a small smile, It's what you do, isn't it? Find lost family members against impossible odds. The brothers laughed together, a sound that had become common in their home, but never lost its sweetness. Their shared eyes, those sunrise eyes, crinkled at the corners in identical patterns. That night, after little Mikey's mother had left with promises to attend his next recital, the three Taylor men sat on their back porch watching fireflies dance across the yard. You know what's weird? Little Mikey said thoughtfully, if I hadn't been hungry that day, if Uncle James hadn't walked by that bakery right then, we might never have found each other. The simplicity of his observation highlighted the fragility of their reunion, how easily it might never have happened. James reached out, one hand to his brother's shoulder, one to his nephew's. But we did find each other, he said firmly, and nothing will separate us again. As little Mikey's 10th birthday approached, James found himself reflecting on the remarkable changes 2 years had brought. His nephew, once a hungry child begging for bread, was now thriving, top of his class, first chair violin in the youth orchestra, and surrounded by friends. Michael's cancer remained in remission. His innovative music education program was being implemented in schools nationwide, and he had begun dating a kind music therapist who worked with children at the hospital. Their family had expanded, healed, strengthened. Yet James still felt a lingering emptiness, a piece of the puzzle still missing. I want to find the place we lived before the fire, he told Michael one evening after little Mikey had gone to bed. I want to see if anything remains of our childhood home. Michael looked surprised. After all this time, it's been almost 25 years, James. The whole neighborhood was rebuilt, but he understood his brother's need for closure, for connecting the final dots of their fragmented history. Together they researched old city records, property deeds, and insurance claims until they found the address of the modest house where they had once lived as a complete family. The journey to their hometown took 3 hours by private plane. Little Mikey came along, curious about the place where his father had grown up and eager to connect with his own roots. The neighborhood had indeed been completely redeveloped. Modern apartments now stood where their home had once been. But the local library remained, as did the park where their father had taught them both to ride bikes. That tree, Michael said suddenly, pointing to an ancient oak at the park's edge. That's where Dad used to hang the swing for us. It survived the fire. James approached the tree reverently, running his hand along the rough bark. There, barely visible through years of growth, was a carving M+J inside a crude heart. Mom did this, he whispered, memories suddenly rushing back with painful clarity. She said it was so we would always remember this was our special place. Little Mikey pressed his small fingers to the carving, a tangible connection to grandparents he'd never met, but whose blood ran in his veins, whose special eyes he'd inherited. The 3 generations linked through that simple mark in an old oak tree. The local historical society provided another unexpected treasure, a newspaper article about the fire with a grainy photograph of evacuees boarding buses. In the background, barely visible, was a woman clutching a baby while a man beside her held the hand of a small boy. That's them, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. That's Mom and Dad. And that's you, James, right before we got separated. The photographic evidence of their last moments as an intact family struck them all into silence. Little Mikey leaned against his father, instinctively offering comfort while trying to process this glimpse into a past that had shaped his present so profoundly. On the flight home, little Mikey fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional day. The brothers spoke quietly, piecing together recovered memories. Do you think they ever gave up looking for you? Michael asked. James shook his head. No, not our parents. They would have searched forever. He hesitated, then added, I've been thinking about something. Our childhood home is gone, but that land, it's where our family began. What if we built something there? Something to honor Mom and Dad and what they taught us about family. The idea took root immediately, both brothers recognizing its rightness. Within months, plans were underway for the Taylor Family Music Center, a state-of-the-art facility where underprivileged children could receive free music education. They purchased the entire block where their home had once stood, ensuring the project would have room to grow. The center would feature rehearsal spaces, recording studios, performance halls, and classrooms, all equipped with the music education technology Michael's team had developed. Most importantly, it would offer scholarships to children whose families couldn't afford instruments or lessons. "Grandpa would have loved this," little Mikey declared as they reviewed the architectural plans. At 11, he had appointed himself unofficial consultant on the project, insisting that kid-friendly spaces be incorporated throughout the design. "Music saved our family twice," he explained with wisdom beyond his years. "First when Dad kept teaching me even when we had nothing, and then when it helped him get better and start his new job." James and Michael exchanged proud glances. Little Mikey had inherited more than their eyes. He had their heart for seeing the meaning beneath life's surface. Construction began just as Michael received his 2-year cancer-free certification from Dr. Reeves. The milestone called for celebration, and James arranged a small party at their home. As guests mingled in the garden, James found himself standing beside his brother, watching little Mikey demonstrate his latest violin piece to his music teacher. "Did you ever imagine this?" Michael asked quietly. 2 years ago, I was dying in a car, worried about leaving my son alone in the world. Now look at us." James shook his head, still sometimes overwhelmed by the miracle of their reunion. "I spent years building wealth because I thought success might somehow lead me back to my family," James admitted. "I figured if I became famous enough, maybe you'd see me in the news and recognize me. It never occurred to me that it would happen because a hungry boy asked me for bread." Michael smiled, watching his son bow at the applause from his small audience. "Those sunrise eyes," he said softly. "Mom always said they would lead us home. I thought it was just a bedtime story, but maybe she knew something we didn't." The brothers stood shoulder to shoulder, complete in a way neither had thought possible, as the sun began to set over their garden, turning the sky the exact color of their shared eyes. The Taylor Family Music Center opened its doors on what would have been their parents' 50th wedding anniversary. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew media attention not just for the facility's impressive design or technological innovations, but for the story behind it. The millionaire who found his long-lost brother and nephew through a chance encounter with a begging child. James had been reluctant to share their personal story, but Michael convinced him of its power to inspire others. "Think of all the separated families who might never stop looking because they heard about us," he'd argued. That perspective had won James over. Little Mikey played the inaugural concert, a piece he had composed himself titled "Sunrise Eyes." His skill had grown remarkably under proper tutelage, his natural talent honed by dedicated practice. As his bow danced across the strings of his own violin, a gift from James on his 11th birthday, the audience sat spellbound. The melody carried echoes of struggle and loneliness, building to a triumphant resolution that spoke of reunion and hope. There wasn't a dry eye in the hall when he finished, the standing ovation lasting several minutes as father and uncle stood at the side of the stage, overcome with pride. The center quickly became a beacon in the community, offering opportunities to children who might otherwise never discover their musical talents. James established an endowment to ensure its operation in perpetuity, while Michael oversaw the curriculum development, bringing in renowned musicians as guest instructors. Little Mikey, despite his youth, insisted on teaching a weekend class for beginners. "I remember what it felt like to want to learn but not have the chance," he explained when James questioned whether it might be too much responsibility. "I want to help kids like me." James found himself changed by the center's mission in unexpected ways. He had always been generous with charitable donations, but seeing the direct impact of their work, children lighting up as they mastered their first songs, parents tearfully watching performances they never thought possible, awakened something deeper. He began spending less time at Horizon Technologies and more at the center, eventually stepping down as CEO to focus on philanthropy full-time. "My company was built to find my family," he told reporters when they questioned the decision. "Now that I've found them, it's time to build something together." 3 years to the day after their reunion outside the bakery, The Taylor brothers stood in the center's main hall after hours, surrounded by the gentle silence that follows a day of music making. "Do you ever wonder about the odds?" Michael asked, looking at the wall of photographs documenting the center's first year. Children playing instruments, giving performances, receiving scholarships. What if I had sent Mikey to a different bakery that day? What if you had taken a different route to your meeting? James nodded, having pondered these questions countless times. "I think some things are meant to be," he said simply. "No matter how long it takes, no matter what obstacles stand in the way." As the Music Center's reputation grew, so did applications for its programs. Children from across the country sought places in its summer intensives, drawn by the quality of instruction and the inspiring story of its founders. James and Michael established satellite locations in other cities, each designed to serve communities where music education had been eliminated from public schools. Little Mikey, now 13 and showing promise as a composer as well as a performer, contributed ideas for reaching children who might be intimidated by formal music training. "We should have a mobile unit," he suggested one evening during a family dinner. "Like a bus converted into a mini studio that could visit neighborhoods and let kids try instruments." His father and uncle exchanged impressed glances. It was a brilliant idea, combining outreach with accessibility. Within months, the first Taylor Music Bus rolled out, equipped with instruments, recording equipment, and instructors ready to spark musical interest in children who might never otherwise cross the threshold of the center. The success was immediate, with long lines forming whenever the colorful vehicle appeared in underserved communities. The family's story continued to spread, inspiring others to reconnect with lost relatives or support causes that united families. James received letters from around the world, people sharing their own reunion stories or asking for help finding missing family members. Though he couldn't address each case personally, he established a foundation dedicated to supporting family reunification efforts, particularly for those separated by disasters, political conflicts, or system failures. "No child should grow up believing they've been forgotten," he said at the foundation's launch. "And no parent should have to stop searching due to lack of resources." Michael's cancer remained in remission, though the years of treatment had left him with some lingering health challenges. His relationship with the music therapist blossomed into marriage, bringing a stepmother into little Mikey's life who understood both his musical gifts and the trauma of his early years. The boy embraced her with characteristic openness, especially after she gave birth to twin girls, sisters who shared the family sunrise eyes, continuing the genetic legacy that had brought them all together. James delighted in his role as uncle to all three children, though he sometimes wondered if he might someday have a family of his own. That question was answered unexpectedly through the foundation's work. A young social worker named Sarah, dedicated to reuniting refugee families, caught his attention with her fierce advocacy and compassionate approach. Their professional relationship gradually deepened into friendship, then love, as they discovered shared values and complementary strengths. When James finally introduced her to his family, little Mikey approved immediately. "She has kind eyes," he declared with the directness of youth. "Different from ours, but just as special." The wedding took place at the Music Center, with little Mikey playing an original composition as his uncle and new aunt exchanged vows. 5 years after the chance meeting that changed everything, the Taylor family gathered to celebrate little Mikey's graduation from middle school. At 14, he was no longer so little, almost as tall as his father now, with the same gentle manner but a confidence that came from years of security and love. His academic achievements matched his musical ones, earning him a place at a prestigious arts high school with a full scholarship. The family celebration included not just Michael and his wife with their twins, but James and Sarah, who were expecting their first child in the fall. "We're thinking of naming the baby after your grandparents," James told his nephew as they shared a quiet moment during the party. "Michael, if it's a boy, after your dad and grandfather. Maria, if it's a girl, after your grandmother." Little Mikey, who now preferred to be called just Mikey, nodded his approval. "They would have loved that. And the baby will have the eyes, won't they? The sunrise eyes?" James smiled, touched by his nephew's connection to their family heritage. "There's a good chance." The geneticist says it's a dominant trait. Mikey looked pleased. Good. Then they'll always be able to find their way home, just like we did. The story of their reunion had taken on almost mythic qualities in family tellings. The hungry boy, the generous stranger, the identical eyes that sparked recognition. Each retelling strengthened their bonds, reminding them how easily they might never have found each other. James sometimes visited the bakery where it all began, usually anonymously, paying for orders in advance so anyone in need could receive food without shame. The baker, who had initially shooed Mikey away, now participated enthusiastically in this program, having learned a powerful lesson about judging those in difficult circumstances. That summer, as the Music Center prepared for its annual scholarship concert, James received an unexpected call. A woman in another state had seen their story on a documentary and recognized something in a photograph of the brothers as children. "I think I knew your parents," she explained hesitantly. "I was their neighbor before the fire. I have some home movies from neighborhood gatherings. They might be in them." James arranged for her to visit immediately, bringing the precious films that might contain images of their parents in happier times. The entire family gathered for the viewing, holding their breath as the grainy footage began to play. There they were, their father tall and lean like his sons, violin tucked under his chin as he played at a backyard barbecue. Their mother laughing as she served cake, her eyes the same distinctive amber with gold flecks that had been passed down to her sons and grandchildren. Little Michael, now the elder Michael, toddled through the scene, followed closely by a protective James. The living room fell silent as they watched these ghosts from the past, these beloved figures whose absence had shaped their lives so profoundly. When the film ended, no one spoke for several minutes. Finally, Mikey, wise beyond his years, said simply, "They're still with us. In our eyes, in our music, in everything we do. They never really left." The 10th anniversary of their reunion brought reflection and new beginnings. The Taylor Family Music Center had expanded to 15 locations nationwide, with international partnerships developing in countries where music education was underfunded. The Family Foundation had helped reunite hundreds of separated families, their success stories displayed in a moving exhibition at the original center. Mikey, now 19, was preparing to attend a prestigious music conservatory, his compositions already gaining recognition in professional circles. And James and Sarah's daughter, Maria, was a precocious 4-year-old with her father's sunrise eyes and her mother's determination. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," Michael said as the brothers watched their children during the anniversary celebration. Mikey was showing his young cousins how to hold violin bows properly, his patience and gentleness reminiscent of his grandfather. "If you hadn't walked by that bakery that day," James nodded, the what-if scenarios still haunting him occasionally despite the years of happiness. "But I did walk by, and you raised a son brave enough to ask a stranger for help. And we both had these ridiculous eyes that Mom always said were magic." They laughed together, comfortable in the shorthand that had developed between them. The celebration included a surprise orchestral performance of Mikey's latest composition, performed by musicians from the center and conducted by Michael himself. The piece told their story in music, the separation, the years of emptiness, the miracle of reunion, and the joy of rebuilding. As the final notes faded, James felt a tugging at his sleeve. Little Maria looked up at him, those familiar eyes serious in her small face. "Daddy, is that really what happened? You didn't know Uncle Michael and Cousin Mikey for a long time, and then you found them because of bread?" James lifted his daughter onto his lap, searching for words a child could understand. "Sometimes life separates people who love each other," he explained. "But love is very powerful. It can help us find each other again, even after a long time." Maria considered this with the gravity only a 4-year-old can muster. "Like a treasure hunt?" she suggested. James smiled, thinking how apt the comparison was. "Exactly like a treasure hunt. And your Uncle Michael and Cousin Mikey were the greatest treasure I ever found." Across the room, Michael caught his eye and raised his glass in a silent toast, the bond between them visible even at a distance. The decades since their reunion had brought challenges as well as joy. Michael's health scares, the growing pains of their various enterprises, the complex emotions of reconnecting with a past they had each processed differently. But through it all, the foundation of family remained unshakable. "We should write a book," Michael suggested later that evening, as the celebration wound down. "Not just about finding each other, but about what happens after the miracle, the work of becoming a family again." James nodded, understanding immediately. Their story didn't end with the recognition outside a bakery. In many ways, that had been just the beginning. As guests departed and the family prepared to return to their respective homes, all within a few miles of each other, by design, James found himself standing alone in the center's main hall. Photographs lined the walls, children whose lives had been changed by music, families reunited through the foundation's work. The Taylor family's own journey from that first shocked recognition to the integrated clan they had become. He thought of all the circumstances that had led to that moment outside the bakery. His decision to walk instead of ride, Mikey's courage in approaching a stranger, the distinctive eyes that had triggered recognition across 20 years of separation. 10 years stretched to 15, then 20. The Taylor family expanded and evolved, their shared enterprises growing in scope and impact. Mikey graduated from the conservatory and returned to the music center as its artistic director, bringing fresh vision to the organization his family had built. Michael, though slowed somewhat by age and the long-term effects of his earlier illness, continued to innovate in music education technology. And James, once defined solely by his business success, found his greatest fulfillment in the family connections that had once seemed permanently severed. The story of their reunion became part of family lore, told and retold to new generations of children with sunrise eyes. The original bakery, now owned by the foundation, operated as both a commercial business and a community resource, providing job training for at-risk youth and free meals for those in need. On the anniversary of their meeting each year, the family volunteered there together, serving bread and pastries to the community. Never forget where it all began, James often reminded the younger family members. With hunger, courage, and recognition. As his 60s approached, James sometimes marveled at how differently his life had unfolded than he had imagined when building his technology empire. The success that had once seemed the ultimate goal now felt like merely the means to something far more valuable. His company continued to thrive under new leadership, but his legacy would be the family he had found and the lives they had touched together. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked him once, knowing how completely he had shifted his focus from business to family and philanthropy. "Not for a second," he answered without hesitation. Michael's 70th birthday was celebrated with a gala concert featuring compositions spanning 3 generations of Taylors. From recordings of their father playing his violin, to Michael's educational pieces, to Mikey's acclaimed orchestral works, to the simple melodies composed by the newest generation of family musicians. James watched his brother on stage, still vital despite the passage of years, and felt a gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. How easily they might never have found each other. How empty his wealth and success would have felt without this connection. How miraculous that a hungry child's request for bread had restored what fire and chaos had torn apart. Later that night, as the extended family gathered at James's home for a more intimate celebration, Mikey, now approaching 40, with children of his own, raised a toast. "To the eyes that brought us together," he said, his voice carrying the musical quality that marked him as his grandfather's descendant. Everyone in the room with those distinctive amber and gold eyes touched their glasses together, the youngest children giggling at the special ritual. "And to the bakery," Michael added with a smile, "where a simple request for bread led to a feast that has nourished us all for 20 years. James met his brother's gaze across the room, sunrise eyes meeting sunrise eyes, the miracle of their connection as powerful as it had been that first day. Have you ever wondered how one moment of kindness can change not just a life, but generations? The story of James and Michael Taylor reminds us that sometimes our greatest treasures aren't in our bank accounts or achievements, but in the connections we make and the families we build. What would have happened if James had ignored that hungry child? What if he had been too busy with his meetings to stop and buy bread for a stranger? The billion-dollar empire he built would have meant nothing compared to what he truly gained: a brother, a nephew, and eventually an entire family bound by love, music, and those remarkable sunrise eyes. This story challenges us all to reconsider our priorities. Are we so focused on success that we're missing opportunities for meaningful connection? How many times have we passed by someone in need, someone who might actually hold the key to what we're truly searching for? Perhaps today is the day to look up from our busy lives and truly see the people around us. Maybe it's time to reconnect with family members we've lost touch with, or to extend kindness to a stranger who crosses our path. After all, we never know which small act might lead to our own miracle of reunion. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear about a time when an unexpected encounter changed your life. Have you ever reconnected with someone after years apart? Do you have your own family reunion story? Share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to hear more powerful stories of reunion, redemption, and the incredible strength of family bonds. Remember, sometimes the most ordinary moments, like asking for bread or taking a different route to work, can lead to the most extraordinary changes in our lives.